So I have about 5 to 10 minutes of paperwork. You know, this is a preamble to the paperwork. I got about 5 to 10 minutes of paperwork. I got about 3 minutes. I'm a horrible estimator. I have about 3 minutes of preamble to the paperwork. Then I have about 5 to 10 minutes of paperwork before I get to the story, aka the moral of the story. The paperwork has to do with two things. In political science, or the political philosophy of the movements of people, including the mythos, which these days, see, that's the thing, everything's been aggressively militarized. The genius of Sun Tzu is winning the war before ever firing a shot. Right? So the shot heard around the world, pretty big deal, very important. Right? But what about the war won with never a shot having been fired, never mind heard? So the paperwork has to do with John Mersheimer. Last video I called him Jack, John. Though that's an interesting Freudian, or perhaps more both quantitatively and qualitatively accurate. Like there's the Freudian slip, right? But then there's the Jungian slip. The Freudian slip has to do with behavioralism and causality. So the Freudian slip has to do with what we call classical causation in a Cartesian sense. The Jungian split, the Jungian slip. The Jungian slip has to do with, there's two types of unconscious, right? Pavlov's dog. Like, Pavlov's dog doesn't necessarily know that it's salivating because the bell has rung. It may, but it may not. Now, what we call Pavlovianism, what we call behavioralism, right? That shit was known a long time ago by people who are smart, and I wouldn't even say so smart, because you don't need to be that smart to know that when the bell rings for lunch, you salivate, right? I'm in the trades. You know, at about 11:50, people start looking at their phones to see what time it is because they're hungry, because they eat at noon, right? I kind of eat when I want, but more or less right around noon. You know, it tends to lean afternoon, somewhere between noon and 1 at work. No matter when I arrive at work, whatever. Anyway, what I'd mentioned last time about the connection between Mersheimer and Dugan had to do with both of their. Mersheimer I guess you could loosely call him an analyst from America, and Dugin, which you could loosely call an analyst from Russia. They both define liberalism in about the same way. So that's a place where East meets West, even though nobody's talking about it, nobody's called it out, nobody's made that connection, but philosophically, there's at least it's actually a pretty large overlap where Dugin and Mearsheimer are speaking. So to my mind, as a layperson who's just seeking the truth, like where John Mearsheimer and Alexander Dugin, like from Russia, where, and I've barely been introduced to them, but that's the thing about the truth. I believe it was, what's his name, Dan Winter. I believe it was him who once said, or Dan Winter, there's a few of them, and they're a little bit hard to distinguish. Said the truth has a certain ring to it. And their truth has a certain ring to it. And even though they've been around, both of them, forever, even though I've only really heard several hours of each, which might sound like a lot, like, oh, so you've seen, 4, 10, 20, 40, in both of their cases, it's about equal for me. It's about, I'd say 6. About 6 each way that I've listened to John Mearsheimer and Alexander Dugin. But that's the thing about like prophecy and truth. The truth has a certain ring to it, right? So I haven't read Dugin's 60 books, never mind what I've missed, because luckily Dugin speaks in English, right? But I think it's fair to assume that he would speak in English differently than he speaks in Russian. Right? And we're confused by the word liberalism. Right? For instance, if we are atheists, right, and we read Spinoza and we see God, 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 we'd be like, fuck this guy, I'm an atheist. Never mind that he is the fundament of atheism, and all he talks about is God. Again, I'm just doing paperwork. I'll get to something interesting. I'll get to the story. I'm just trying to clear up a few things so far as I see them. I'm not the judge, I'm not the prosecutor, I'm not the defense, I'm not the bailiff. I'm a jury member. After the fact. Publishing my expose. For right or wrong, God knows I'll learn more to come. But they both define liberalism the same way. And they both define, like, for instance, in America, what we call Republicans, both of them would define as liberalism. Mearsheimer, so far as I've conceived, he makes the same criticisms of what they both call liberalism, yet, at the same time, he recognizes it. He appreciates the freedom of liberalism. I don't know Dugin's views on that. Except for, it seems he's liberal enough to concede to the fact that there are many paths, there are many ways, and that in space, the way time flows isn't linear. Which is to say, we think of spatial wells within relativism, right? Gravity, gravitational lensing, and that kind of thing. So within space, we're accustomed to the idea of gravitational wells. But we're not at all accustomed to that same inversion. We're not at all, a lot of us aren't at all, and especially explicitly in language that we can identify, define, and agree upon. We're not all in agreement about the way time lenses. And we are not yet a perfect lens, though we reach for perfection. More paperwork. This is actually just a footnote. Agni. Agnes. Agni, India. Agnes. Rome, about 300 AD. Sparta, 300 the movie. All those 300 dudes are the counterpoint. All those 300 dudes are the counterpoint to the one woman. 300 dudes, one woman at 13. Saint Agnes. Like I said, more paperwork. Look it up. Anyway, again, more paperwork. What's happening? What Dugan and Mersheimer are describing in liberalism and the problem with liberalism. There's that, and there's that connection that's not being made, and it's there. So we need to study those, both of their philosophies together for those who are so inclined, right? I won't reach much deeper into them because I've made the connection and now it's time to move on. I'm a trailblazer. That's my job. It's other people's job to develop trails. It's my job to blaze one. Blaze. Fire. Blaze. B-L-A-Z-E. Blaze. B-L-A-I-S-E. Blaise Pascal. How much time we got? 14:40. Okay, we're about at the right time. Time to move on. I don't want none of that. That's what people around here say. Right? That's what people around here say. I don't want none of that. Trying to sell me something? As soon as you come to my door, I don't want none of that. Do you believe in communion or not? Do you believe in the Eucharist or not? Is bread flesh? This is some marble rye. And some of that, what is it? I can't remember what kind of steak that has good marbling. Marble, Michelangelo. I will take this time to remember the bloodless sacrifice, the bloodless Passover. I don't want none of that. Doesn't matter if it's the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witness who come to your door. I don't want none of that. Now I don't want none of that as a colloquialism. And it's interesting. Right? Because you could say, get the fuck out. Now, neither's nice. Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out? I don't want none. Knock, knock, knock. You open the door. You see somebody you don't know with a book and a suit. I don't want none. Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out means don't fuck. I don't want none means I don't want anything, but it's a double negative. So it means you do want something. So if it was a perfect philosopher and you said, I don't want none because it's a double negative, I do not want none, I want something. But because it's a double negative, the first thing that affronts you is the sentiment, is the spirit of the law. I don't want your shit, which means people that resemble you have come to me with their shit and they've only fucking let me down and led me astray. Yet, within the logic, within the sentiment, within the mythos, it represents the culmination of history that has come upon one. Neatly wrapped in a colloquialism. And on the other side, logically, it means yes, I want something, but you have to be logical enough to understand that when I say, I don't want none, I don't want nothing, which means I want something. But you have to be logical enough to both interpret that code, even if it's a subconscious code, which it 99.999% is. You have to be smart enough to decode that linguistically. And you also have to be smart enough, well enough, centered enough to offer a response. Interestingly, we always look at etymology as a causation from the past. Biblically, you could say, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. Right? The Alpha is the beginning, the Omega is the end, because the Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, the Omega is the last. The A and the O, kind of. But to understand it in English, it would be I'm the A and the Z. I'm the alpha and the Z, kind of. Causality has a pole. There is a beginning. There is an end. This sphere will be outlined in lightning. Not every part of the surface will be illuminated, but the entire surface will be illuminated in an electrical web. And the question for you and for me is, am I on the surface in that web? It will look very different, right? Like a pineapple. A pineapple is a mathematical object. So what's the Catholic Church, right? So you have a pineapple and it has a Fibonacci twist in a certain way, and it twists the way it twists, but it's almost like a checkerboard, kind of. And it's like, so to go from the beginning to the end, it's like if you go here, 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 right? It's a pineapple. It's this twist grid, not perfect, but it speaks to a kind of perfection. There's a free will in the way that the pineapple grows, but it's a limited free will because we more or less, right? It's similar to the way they say every snowflake is different. Right? Well, every fucking pineapple is different, yet they behold, they are married to the same pattern. And there are better and worse pineapples. There are bigger and smaller pineapples. And you might get a small pineapple that is astringent. You might get a small pineapple that is rotten. You might get a small pineapple that is perfectly succulent. Or you might get a large pineapple that is perfectly succulent. Or you might get a large pineapple that is genetically engineered or has been sprayed with pesticides. You don't know. I don't know. So there is this free will, this limited free will, but what we know about the pineapple is that it will correspond to this Fibonacci sequence. Also symbolically, I'll get to this at some other point, and I've touched upon it before, pine and apple in one object as a word is symbolically important and reaches back to, believe it or not, Turkey. The country. All right, that's enough on that. I don't want none. The other interesting thing about phonetically about the word none is that it can mean nothing, but that it can also mean none, like the nuns of the church, which makes us think of the Bible. And then when we think of the Bible, the word none is the Hebrew word for fish. None, pronounced differently, also could be noon. Because O and U have that phonetic connection. Noon, high sun. And the opposite of high sun would be midnight. With the nuns in their black garb with the crescent above their head. A little more bookkeeping. The crescents of Islam could be associated with the moon goddess Ya of Egypt. Essentially, Russia and Islam. The Russian Orthodox Church The Russian Orthodox Church and Islam both, symbolically, to my mind, as a powerful political movements of people force, carry the symbolic mythology of Egypt that has been not lost. There's a lot of symbology of Egypt that has been lost, but most has been destroyed, hidden, specifically of the 18th dynasty. Again, more paperwork. Nun also, yeah, in Hebrew it means fish, or that's what they say, which is connected with ichthos in Greek in the New Testament, which is associated with Luke. Again, more paperwork. Yeah, and I believe noon also quite well phonetically, nun, noon. I believe it quite well phonetically carries through both Aramaic and Arabic. So when you have something that connects well through Arabic, Aramaic, and Hebrew, that's a pretty tight bond. But a similar meaning is eel, insinuating snake, but also propagation by shoots, which also has many meanings. Because propagation by shoots could mean you have a tree and you cut off a slice and plant it, and it becomes a tree, like they do with weed, like they do with bananas, etc. Other propagation by shoots, for instance, rice is kind of propagated by shoots because shoots still has a little bit of a slippery definition, or it's slightly ambiguous, especially historically, of a definition. So when it says that Jesus in the King James, when it says after Jesus rose from the dead, he survived death. He was crucified on the fucking cross. He comes out of the tomb and he's like, I'm kind of hungry. Got anything? Yeah, we got a little bit of leftover broiled fish. And he ate it. That sounds fishy to me. However, it's still a remarkable improvement. So far as bloodletting, so far as sacrifice, Jesus eats half a fish after he's risen from the dead. From the beginning to the end of the Bible, that's a remarkable improvement over killing everything in sight, the destruction of the earth, sacrifices of every fucking thing you can fucking imagine, killing of brothers, killing of cousins. It's 1,000 times better than Abraham killing, or going off to kill Isaac, or going off to kill Ishmael, whether you're into the Old Testament or the Quran. It's 1,000 times better than that. Who was there at Jesus' birth, Meri? Who was there at Jesus' death? Mary, Mary, Mary. Yeah, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Why is it my job to say this? Well, first of all, it's not my job. It's like, it's an order. It's like, why am I here? To say this. Everything else comes second, right? God. Creation. If you believe in the Bible, God's most perfect creation is Meri. Jesus is not God's creation. Jesus created Meri so that God could know God. On either side of Meri is the beginning of it, the beginning and the end. Right? Or there's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, then there's the middle. Who's the middle? Meri. The duality of God is the beginning and the end. Right? It's not a duality, really, because the North and South Pole are not constructed in the same way. They don't have the same number, just as a pineapple, yet they have this Fibonacci ratio, right? Etc. I don't get. I disregard Fibonacci a little bit. Fibonacci, who was birthed, so they say, from Hemachandra of India and the Hemachandra numbers, which are Hemachandra numbers define a more complex substructure of Fibonacciism. People might call Hemachandrianism emergent of Fibonacci. It depends on which way you define causality, as a priori or a posteriori. But the thing is the fact is the alpha and the omega, the before and the after. The truth, in so much as it is now, is pinned to what came before and what will come. Will, right? We talk about free will. What's free will? Get to the omega point or don't. And that's free will. Yes, we have free will. We can coalesce in heaven. We, or I, here's my free will. I can coalesce with all of those who also coalesce in heaven, in heaven. Otherwise, it's not quite like that, but that's a way of thinking about it. It's not always pretty, and actually most often it's not, or that's been my experience as of late. Maybe it doesn't always have to be this way. Speaking of Meri, I believe it was my Aunt Mary who knitted this. She died 20 years ago. And first time I saw this, I was practically still in diapers. In a bin beneath a daybed. In my trailer with my mom when I was a boy, with all the winter hats and gloves and so on. My Aunt Mary, who was sister-in-law to my grandmother, Marion. Something about Mary. And of course, Mary, Marion, Maid Marian, Mary, Mother Mary, Maid Marian, Moses' sister Miriam, Marian. Arabic, I believe, is also phonetically closely related to Miriam. Same with Aramaic, Hebrew, Miriam. Mary, Mary, I am. Miriam, Mir, I am. Mary, in Egyptian, means beloved. And it's not in the etymology dictionaries. And it's fucking... It's about the most true thing that I know. I know very, 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 very little. But I know this. The name Mary came from the Egyptian word Mary. M-E-R-I. Beloved. It's not an opposition. It's a reconciliation.